Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General Mattis, for your past service to this country, and thank you again for your willingness to step forward in service once again. I was happy to see your responses to the advanced policy questions affirm the importance of nuclear weapons, which you describe as fundamental to our nation's security. And your statement that, quote, we must continue with the current nuclear modernization plans for all three legs of the triad, end quote. When we talked in my office about the triad in our meeting last week, you brought up, I believe, a very important point that bears repeating relating to the ICBM force. And there's a broad recognition that the legs of the triad have different strengths. The bombers are visible, and therefore they have what I call signaling value. The submarines are highly survivable, and the ICBMs are the most responsive leg, and they can be launched at a moment's notice. You mentioned what you called the targeting challenge of our ICBM force and what that targeting challenge poses for our adversaries. Could you explain that further?
Ma'am, in my review of the triad that you brought up here, Senator, I looked at each one of those legs. Is it necessary? And I haven't had access to all the classified data, but I had a fair amount of background on this, and some of the aspects of why we have a triad have not changed. So in looking at each leg of it with the ICBM force, it's clear that they are so buried out in the central U.S. that any enemy that wants to take us on is going to have to commit 2, 3, 4 weapons to make certain they take each one out. In other words, the ICBM force provides a cost-imposing strategy on an adversary. And again, what we're trying to do is set such a stance with our triad that these weapons must never be used ever again. And so the deterrent value of the ICBM force is that an enemy would have to basically use 3 or 4 times as many weapons to take out each individual one. So that's the targeting challenge the enemy faces against the ICBM force.
Thank you. And in your answers to this committee's advanced questions about whether we are deterring hostile activity in cyberspace, you say no, and you continue on to state, quote, to be deterred, our adversaries must know they will suffer consequences from cyber attacks that outweigh any gains they hope to achieve. If they choose to act as adversaries, we will treat them as such, end quote. I completely agree and believe that more cost must be imposed on those who are responsible for cyber attacks. So this gets to the issue we've discussed in great detail on this committee, which is the lack of an overall policy to respond to cyber attacks. When we discussed this in our recent meeting, you made a point that I believe is also very important, which is that the lack of a policy is potentially destabilizing because adversaries unaware of our boundaries may take a provocative action that forces the United States to act militarily. I believe you characterized it as, quote, stumbling into a conflict. Essentially, we don't want to find out what constitutes an active war in cyberspace the hard way. Can you elaborate on that point for us?
Senator, I believe a lot of crises and even wars have started from miscalculation. So while it's important we make clear what we stand for, I think in an area such as you're bringing up here, cyber, it's also important that our adversaries know what we absolutely will not tolerate. And by making that clear, you're less apt to have somebody stumble into a situation where now we're forced to take action. That said, putting together a policy like this is not something the Department of Defense can do alone. We certainly have a key role, a fundamental role, but at the same time, from our Treasury Department to our Commerce Department to our Homeland Security, we need to get a lot of people in the room and put this policy together. I realize it's a new domain, but that doesn't give us an excuse not to address it on an urgent basis.
Thank you, sir. I look forward to working with you on that. This committee has been focused on cyber. We are looking for a policy, and I look forward to developing one with you. And I invite you to come to Nebraska and visit Offutt, and would love to be there when you're there. Thank you.
Thanks.